This is the Special Board of Education meeting in open session, interviewing the consulting firm in response to the request for proposal to conduct a superintendent search. We had an interview yesterday, so we'll follow the same procedures and process. The interviewing scoring tool, that will remain the same, so just use the one that we used last night. And just as is instructed, just put the number in at that last, for that last question in the first column. I think the other ones are good to go. So
the other one is already turned in, right?
Turned in?
No,
we haven't turned in
yet because it's in your Excel. So make sure to save it into your laptop.
That's what I did wrong. Okay.
Yeah. Otherwise, you're not
the wrong one. Thank you.
Otherwise, you're gonna lose everything.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just bring everything up here. Our first vendor is McPherson. Thank you for being here today. We have, I think we said about 10 minutes, but we're gonna take questions? Okay. And then also, yes, thank you, Kate. A reminder, please have your mics on. Yes, it's so hard to...
Let's just leave it on.
Yeah.
That's the best thing to do.
Yeah.
And, side conversations will be cool.
Yeah.
And shut it off when you want to do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Go ahead.
Great. Thanks, Gloria. Thank you, everyone, for having us. We're honored. We're privileged to be here. My name is Damian McCroy. This is my colleague, Brian Haynes, and we're representing McPherson & Jacobson, based out of Omaha, Nebraska, a firm that's been around for a long time. And you've obviously read materials, and we're not here to really do a presentation because you don't want a presentation. You told us that when we had the opportunity to watch your board discussion about these opportunities. And so we'd really love to have a conversation with you tonight, and it's clear to us that you have specific priorities and topics that you'd like us to address relative to race and equity, demographics, communication and community engagement, and the board-firm relationship. Is that an accurate representation?
Yes.
Great. Well, with that as an introduction, I could go through my credentials. I could talk about McPherson & Jacobson, but I don't think that's necessary because I think you did that as a basis for inviting us here today. I'd rather tell a story about who I am, because I think you're interviewing me and Brian as much as you're interviewing our firm. And I think the obvious question I'd be wondering if I were you is, how does the composition of these two people sitting at this end of the table represent the richness and the diversity of the Madison Metropolitan School Board and the community that you serve? And that's what I'll address through the course of my story. Also, allow me to say Janet Dixon, one of our colleagues, could not be here tonight. You've got her credentials in front of you, and I would be remiss if I didn't point out that if we have the privilege of securing the service of this job search, she will be joining us in the process. Okay. So let me begin by saying just I am a descendant, a fourth-generation descendant of a family that emigrated here in the 1850s, spoke no English at the time. And over the course of 4 short generations, I now have the privilege of serving as a superintendent of schools in the greater Green Bay area. I've served in my capacity for the last 15 years. So I work with the Board of Education, and I value and recognize and appreciate just the incredibly important synergy that needs to be present between the board and the superintendent as we serve the needs of the children, the families, and the community that has entrusted us with the stewardship, right, of responsibility for governing and leading the school district. And right about the time my family arrived in America in the 1850s, Horace Mann, I guess the father of public education at the time, made this comment. He said that public education is the great equalizer, and public education is the balancing wheel of the social machinery of America. At a time when millions of immigrants were coming into the country, we as an institution, one of the most enduring and endearing institutions, saw it as our right, saw it as our responsibility to embrace and to accept and to take all. I told my staff when I welcomed them back 2 weeks ago, that we are the Ellis Island of institutions, because we take all children, regardless of background, experience, race, gender. And that's a high calling, and that's the reason why I've dedicated 29 years of my life to this pursuit. That's the reason why I wanted to accept the invitation to be here to interview for this job, because I share that passion. And while I might not necessarily reflect the diversity of this area, I share the commitment that I think you have as a governing body to ensure that those values are reflected in the search firm that you partner with here tonight. You know, we're a great institution. If you think about Annie Sullivan, most people know Helen Keller, right? But we are the institution of Annie Sullivan, who said that I need a teacher as much as Helen does. I loved Annie Sullivan's humility, and she went on to say that my ability to educate this child will be the distinguishing event of my life, if I have the brains and if I have the perseverance to accomplishment. So Nikki, I know you're an advocate for special education. You know, Annie Sullivan was personalizing the learning experience before people were using the term personalized learning. So I love the fact that our institution represents her. We are the institution of McCullough, right? The first woman teacher astronaut who signed up for a job that she knew was dangerous, right? She was one of 11,000 applicants. She knew there was danger involved in the Space Shuttle Challenger, and yet she said, I touch the future because I teach. I'm proud of that heritage that we represent. Krista McCullough. We're the institution of Hercules Demetrius Anastasius Nicolau. You've never heard of Hercules Demetrius Anastasius Nicolau, but he became my best friend in college. He was from Chicago. He was the byproduct of an arranged marriage. A dad who was a butcher on the south side who died when he was 7. He had a middle school teacher who said, you can go to college. And he chose to go to college. And I took him home for Christmas one time, and because his brother wouldn't pick him up. His brother was in a gang. His mom didn't have a driver's license. She spoke no English. I pulled into his neighborhood and saw he lived in a boarded-up butcher shop on the 2nd floor with an uncle who was sick and a brother who was unemployed and a mom who spoke no English. And yet, that's part of the American dream, right, that we represent. And today, Hercules Demetrius Anastasius Nicolau is an elementary principal in Kimberly, Wisconsin. We are the institution of Sam Sisavath, Saming Sisavath. When I started teaching, one of the things I had my students do on the first day of school is stand up in front of the class, introduce yourself, tell us something you don't know, or others rather don't know about you, and why this is going to be your best year yet. Saming stands up in front of the class. I remember it like it was yesterday, although it was probably 25 years ago, and he said, I'm Saming Sisavath. My family escaped from Laos by crossing a river at midnight. We ended up in a refugee camp in the Philippines before a family in Chicago sponsored us. He arrived in Chicago, moved to Wausau, where he worked on a ginseng farm. While he moved to Green Bay, subsequently he became the state powerlifting champion, and then ended up in my high school in suburban Green Bay. And I, as a wrestling coach at the time, I said, have you ever wrestled? And of course he hadn't. And long story short, he joins the wrestling team. We're in the state semifinals against Wisconsin Rapids, and Saming had never wrestled in a varsity match. That night, we put him in the lineup. He looked me in the eye and he said, Coach, I may not win this match, but I guarantee you I won't get pinned. He didn't get pinned that night. He bridged for 5 minutes off of his back. We won the match by 2 points to go to the state tournament. Saming graduates, goes on to serve with distinction in the Navy. And finally, we're the institution that allows a community member like me to go to the Western Sahara in North Africa to be part of an event maybe you've never heard of. It's called the Dialogue for Peace. There is a refugee camp in North Africa that I had the honor of going to, and it was Christian and Muslim leaders for 3 days dialoguing not about their differences, but rather about their similarities. And the interesting thing is this gentleman's name is Ada. He was the principal, or is the principal of a school within the refugee camp, and he spoke no English, and I didn't speak his language, and yet we have this common connection as educators, and I gave him a token of appreciation to share with his children. A few hours later, he comes back, he taps me on the shoulder as I'm listening to the dialogue for peace and motions me to follow him out into the parking lot with another man who is with him, motions me to get into a truck that was sitting there, and mind you, I had just met him a few hours earlier, and so there's a leap of faith, right, involved in that. I got into the back of the truck, at which point he turned around and presented me with this ceremonial garb as a gift of appreciation, and I started crying. It touched my heart because while we were separated culturally and otherwise, we had this commonality, and that was caring for and educating children. So what does all that mean? It means that I recognize, value, and appreciate diversity. It's part of who I am. It's part of the leadership experience I bring to my school district and my community. I was born in Madison in 1968, so I've got a personal connection to the city. I still have relatives that live in the greater Madison area. So while professionally I have a goal of working for you, personally I have a goal of serving you in the community by giving you a great quality experience that results in an excellent leader that's going to partner with you for the betterment of Madison, the children, and the families that you serve. Thank you.
So you had asked to hear about...
If you could just turn on your mic.
I'm sorry. So I'm Brian Haynes, and one of the areas you asked about is hearing a little bit about our community engagement process, communication, and our relationship with the board. Just a little bit about Brian Haynes, I guess. My connection to Madison really, in a lot of ways, transformed my values and belief experience. I grew up in the little town O'Connell, Wisconsin, just north of Green Bay, and went to 2 music camps here, starting my junior year in high school, senior year in high school. Long story short, I ended up going to school here to be a teacher and did all of my coursework here, undergrad, master's, and the doctorate work. And ethnic-wise, if you know Oconto, Wisconsin, it's a very homogeneous community. I was the second child in our family to go on to college, so it was there was a lot of doubt when I go back in my childhood and wondering if I could even do this, and Madison was all big and encompassing, and it opened my eyes to a world. We're proud we have a daughter, Kate, graduated from college and then went on and served 2 years in the Peace Corps. She was in Moldova for 2 years and speaks fluent Romanian now and speaks German, and I'm going to see her actually next week. She now lives in Colorado. So a lot of that impact changed us and changed our whole family. As far as communication, I served for 17 years on Wisconsin School Public Relations Board as a volunteer and as a superintendent. I was a superintendent for 21 years, and I always said to that group, I was surrounded by communication gurus, if you will. I felt like I took so much more from them than I could give them as a superintendent, but a lot of discussions and presentations and seminars about community engagement and relationships, something that's very close to my heart. I say to the staff, and I said to the staff every year, well, who we hire is the most important decision we make. There is no more important decision than that. And the new teachers were always introduced that way because the leaders that I worked with knew that that was something I highly valued, that they put a lot of time and effort into that decision, whether it be a teacher or an administrator. There is no more important decision. And beyond that, just other values of mine, I would say life is about serving others, and it's about relationships. And with that intertwines, we don't have to make this really complicated. Sometimes just that golden rule that we learned when we were very small goes a great distance. So communication, you'll find that our communication is very fluid. I think if you would look at pages 21 through 23, when you have a chance in the RFP, there's an actual checklist there. There are 3 sheets. What we offer you is a defined process to follow. We work for you, and we certainly are all ears and eyes and willing to revise that. There are certain areas, as I talk about board relations at the end here, where if we need to challenge you on something, you still have the final say. I'd say, going to that last area, you asked the question if we would share a time when we had to challenge the board. I worked with the West Bend School District in their search a year ago, and at some point in time we were talking about the issue of referendums came up, and I have a lot of experience in passing referendums, And they were considering moving on with a referendum prior to making their superintendent hire, and that was one where I felt like I really need to weigh in on this. I felt strongly that relationship with the community, and that's a piece that they really should think seriously about going through with that, even though a lot of it was planned. I don't know what the outcome of that was, but that's just you wanted an example of when I challenged the board on that. Another example, if it would ever happen, and I'm glad it's never happened with McPherson, if the board would bring up something that would be unethical or illegal or immoral, if something like that was just that out of bounds, asking us to do something, that would be an opportunity where I would challenge the board to reconsider, because likely the outcome of that wouldn't be sustainable for a successful candidate or for a transition. So who we hire is the most important decision. As far as community engagement, the community engagement process, Madison, it would be very important to reach all areas and a diverse population. And just the contacts and the information in this room as board members, we would be asking you to make recommendations. Where should we make those contacts, and what are the key groups? And based on our experience, we would also make suggestions. And there are some obvious connections as far as internal, but internal, external, and certainly the community, the diverse community, making sure that you have all of those people in a nominal group activity. We would make that transparent by literally recording and posting and paraphrasing, to make sure that if someone is providing input, that we're characterizing exactly what they meant to say, so that paraphrasing, so it's accurate. That would be compiled in a detailed report. The board would get that report, and that would entail asking questions like, what are you most proud of in the district? What are issues that the district is facing? And I think there was a third one there. Characteristics. What characteristics would you like to see the new superintendent hold? And that does a lot in terms of selling and telling the story of Madison. It is really a fun part of that experience is listening to all of the strengths and what people are proud of. And Madison...
Your time is up. You can just finish your sentence.
Okay, and Madison is obviously a destination that a lot of people want to be here, and obviously you know what I'm saying. I spent a lot of time here, and I have a very close friend that lives in Fitchburg, so I certainly... We'd love to earn the search, and we'll be open for any questions you have. We can go into more detail now about the RFP, as you wish here.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, so each of us will have questions, and we'll go around the table, and we'll get started with Kate.
Thanks. Thank you both for being here. So you raised this already, but can you speak a little bit about racial equity strategies that you're using, and in particular experience with anti-racist leadership experience, how you access that type of talent, and what the community and staff engagement process would look like?
So Kate, just for clarification purposes, are you speaking in regards to specifically, in my case, like my district and or McPherson and Jacobson, or both?
Mostly on the latter. So I think, how would you support us from a search perspective in terms of accessing talent that has experience with anti-racist leadership?
Yeah, so equity is all about fairness, right? And equity is really a mindset and a value, and it comes through loud and clear when we take a look at the work you've done. And specifically, I've spent a lot of time looking at your strategic framework. Very impressed with it, and actually using some ideas in my own district. So thank you for being a leader. I think it's arguably one of the strongest documents I've seen, and I hope you're very proud of the work you've done. And what caught my attention right away is a framework that engaged 2,000 participants, right, in over 100 different meetings, leading to deep engagement with your leadership team that provides a perspective. So I think the model that you're accustomed to as a district, as reflected in this document, is the same model that we would use to get at the equity issue. And if you've heard of Jamie Vollmer, but he's author of a book titled Schools Cannot Do It Alone. Talks about this great conversation that needs to happen at the community level. And my sense and my belief is that in your case, that's an ongoing conversation about things that really matter. And I think you've taken some really bold stands on some really important topics that aren't typical in most school districts in America. even in urban settings. I want to applaud you for that. Regardless of whether we get your business, I think you're champions in leading the way in some really critical areas relative to equity, race, and diversity. And those are hard stands to take and sometimes bring opposition, and I'm sure I'm preaching a little bit to the choir in terms of saying that. So Vollmer talks about this process where I cultivate understanding that leads to trust, which leads to your ability to ask for permission, which leads to support. And then it's continuous and ongoing, right? So think understanding. That happens through dialogue. That happens through time. That happens through shared experience. So we have these stakeholder listening sessions. Part of what we're going to do is ask those questions that Brian referenced a few moments ago to engage your community. So you own the process. We are going to spend time with you before we go to the community, and we're going to take you through a process whereby you'll identify 5 key qualities or attributes that you're looking for in the ideal candidate. And then we're going to ask your community to provide us with input, and then we're going to aggressively search. So given the fact that race and equity and diversity are values that you have as a school district, we have a pretty strong profile of the candidate that we're looking for, and now we need to recruit aggressively to get that candidate to come on board. Now, in our case, we've got 134 consultants across the country in 34 states. Composition of our team of consultants is around 30% diverse in terms of gender and race, and so we feel like that gives us the bandwidth to really take the values of this community. And let's face it, Wisconsin, the pool isn't probably that deep in terms of the ideal candidate that you might be looking for. It doesn't mean the candidate doesn't exist, but as the second largest school district in the state and a very uniquely comprised district, there aren't a lot of other districts like Madison. And so we've done searches recently in Rochester. We've done searches in Columbus, Ohio, another pretty diverse Big Ten city. So we've got experience, we've got boots on the ground that's going to help us take the qualities or characteristics you're looking for, and then aggressively search for the candidates that fit the profile. And certainly I think, and I don't know if this is a question you're going to ask, to be able to find a candidate or candidates that are willing to continue the good work you're doing here. My assumption is, while it's not perfect, I'm betting that there's a lot of what foundational groundwork you've laid that needs to continue with the leadership of the new superintendent. And so will the new superintendent be able to embrace the vision you have, the ambitious goals you have, the levers for change you have, and I love the way you articulated at the end, the way that you're going to work as an entity, as a governing body, ways of working. An example being ongoing advocacy. The superintendent, with our Board of Education and other elected officials in school districts and institutions, will advocate for change at the local, state, and national levels to ensure policy and funding supports teachers, the profession, public education, children, and families. So I know I'm giving you a broad brush response to your question, Kate, but hardwired into all of that then are the values around equity, making sure that we're recruiting the right candidate who shares common beliefs in that area.
Thank you.
Great. And next is Nikki.
You've answered some of this, but I'm going to ask, as you stated, Madison's a unique area. Have you often worked with school districts around this size? Is the first half.
I'm going to give you 2 responses. I'll go first, and Brian will share a list of districts like Madison. I just referenced Rochester and Columbus. I was involved in the DeForest search, where we were able to recruit and hire Eric Runes. DeForest is, neighboring in a way to Madison, and probably remember this past spring they passed a significant referendum in excess of $100 million with Eric and his board really working with that community. So I'm proud of that search. It's the closest one to Madison that I've been involved with. There are others at the national level. Wake County, in excess of 100,000 students. Scottsdale is open right now. We're doing that search as a firm, and a number of others on the sheet. Pretty substantial, pretty large districts, anywhere from 300 to 300,000 students, and you see some big ones that are identified there. Clark County being one of them.
And the other half of my question they're a little disjointed, because I put it that way, is your firm's, one, I appreciate your quoting Annie Sullivan. Most people mention Helen Keller, very few mention the teacher. But my question is, what is your firm's experience with special education and inclusion, and whether you believe inclusion is a necessity when recruiting a diverse candidate?
Well, absolutely, inclusion is important. So we have a mission statement and a belief statement that basically, it's simple, but I think it's inclusive of your question, Nikki. It states that every child deserves a great educational experience, and every school district then requires great leadership in order to make that happen. And marrying the two together is going to be for the benefit of children, and certainly philosophically inclusion is one of those values, one of those pillars that's of critical importance to us, both personally within this role and then professionally during our respective leadership in both Ashwaubenon and Howard Swamico.
And just for the other board members that haven't seen the list yet, I apologize. We have one copy I'm circulating. For the public also, if you're watching this, what I'm circulating is a list of districts. There are about 12 districts on there that are Madison size, and as Damien mentioned, some of them are 2 or 3 times larger that the firm has worked for. Firm's placed over 725 superintendents in positions over time. There's a stable of about 900 applicants on file. There's a website this website gets about 150,000 hits a day, or a month rather. So I mean, there's significant activity that's generated as a result of the organization. Obviously it's been around for quite some time now.
Legally, we're not able to require that when an applicant fills out an application that they answer the race, ethnicity, or gender criteria on the application, but Brian will share some of the data that we have, and I think maybe it speaks a little bit better to Kate's earlier question.
And Nikki also bringing up some of the questions there. You know, we watched your tape and we took to heart all of the questions that you raised at your meeting as you were preparing for this. So this is just a listing of the number of applicants
over the last 5 years.
Over the last 5, who specified, you know, specifying what their ethnicity is. So there were 78% of them were white, 22% were non-white, 2% were American Indian or Alaska Native. We had 1% Asian, 12% black, and 6% were Hispanic. Just to give you a breakdown and an example of the scope of gender. You know,
you didn't speak to gender.
Applied. So as far as gender, yeah, gender was 29% female and 71% male. Right.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. Chris?
So again, you kind of touched on your working relationship with the board, but I would like to give you the opportunity to talk in a little bit more depth about how you see your working relationship with the board when you engage in a superintendent search.
Yeah, we have a process, Chris, that dates back to 1991. We refined it over a period of 30 years, working with over 700 boards during that time, and the placement of superintendents in 41 different states throughout the country. So we feel like the process is good, and we don't hire the superintendent, right? We provide the board with a great process to make a decision. Our job is to be a resource to the board. So the way we're going to support the board in its effort is really plan the work and then, or work the plan and then plan the work and work the plan as it relates to the process in place. Your packet has great detail that goes through the process. If we're selected as your choice, our next meeting would involve a lot of time walking through the logistics of that. Ultimately, however, you are the boss and we work for you, so we're going to make recommendations based on experience. If you have other ideas or thoughts or opinions about what might be best, then our job is to listen, to understand. Every context is different, right? So it would be presumptuous to come in here and say this is, you know, an ironclad process that works in every situation. So we need to have the flexibility and the nimbleness to listen, to understand, to share an opinion about what has worked in the past, and then, if at all possible, to accommodate your ideas and your preferences to make sure this is a process that works for you. So
within that process, there are 5 phases. Just as an example, Chris, in that first phase, one of the most critical and important tasks would be asking the board through a formalized process, a systematic process, to identify what are those key characteristics that you'd want the superintendent to have, based on the needs of the district and based on the input that we get from the stakeholders. Remember, that's a question we ask them as well. We also use the information from the stakeholders, what are you proud about in the community, to put together that pitch to the community. That's definitely, there's a lot that people don't realize in every school district. Frankly, I think that's something we can do a better job with in public education, is telling our positive story daily, what happens in the classroom and across the district. So, very good question.
So a little bit more detail on community engagement, both how you're going to do it in more specifics, like the types of forums or focus groups or whatever you might organize, and also at what points in the timeline you're going to incorporate the information you get from the community into the process of recruiting.
Okay, so with the community engagement process, one of the initial steps would be asking the board to identify where are those subgroups throughout the entire community, representing the entire district. The obvious ones would be internal with teachers, students, other administrators. Certainly, you have your voice at the table throughout this whole process as a school board. But then we get into the business community, be it the Chamber of Commerce, there may be churches, there may be other subgroups that we want to have around that table. And we would advise 8 to 12 people in that process, because we find people are more willing to share. But what happens is we schedule those days, that gets scheduled, we communicate that out, and inevitably there are conflicts because some of these people are very busy. So we also have an online component that will allow them to do this online so that we can get that input. And let's face it, certain populations, it is difficult to connect with them face-to-face sometimes. So we want to have alternate ways of trying to get that feedback. And sometimes if we provide the technology, that's another option to do that. So how that's used, that information gets taken, that information is summarized. Again, we paraphrase to make sure we're characterizing exactly what someone is saying. Make sure we have agreement before they leave. They see the entire list. I'm going to just go to how this played out in West Bend. On the screen, as they are providing the input, open, transparent to the community, input is provided, people can come and observe this. We had a few people come and observe those activities. That information is shared, it's summarized, it goes to you in the form of a formalized report, so you have every comment that everyone is saying. Now you're able to discern that, and you're able to compare what you as a board, for example, identified as those 5 key characteristics. How aligned are you to the community, and at least the perception of the community, in terms of what you need in terms of qualities to hire the superintendent? So am I answering your question, Chris?
Yeah, I would just add, Chris, when it comes to the search, then we've got that document based upon community feedback. We hand that to individuals that we're recruiting, and we say this is the feedback from the community, so they're able to have a thorough knowledge and understanding of community input, values, comments, questions, concerns, to fully understand the uniqueness of Madison based upon that feedback.
Do you encourage school boards to participate in that process at all? Like school board members to be there and participate or not?
We have not actively recruited school board members to be part of that. You certainly are welcome to sit there and, to serve maybe more in a listening role would be advantageous so that you can glean additional insights. I think whenever, as a board member, we call them listening sessions or linkages in my community. We're meeting with different stakeholder groups every month, so it's pretty consistent with my experience in my current district. So I think we're totally open to that. It hasn't necessarily been part of the process we've used in the past, but I see no reason why not.
I would say the same, Chris. In my experience, when you ask that question about what issues do you see facing the district, as a board member, you just have to ask that question. Would that person, would that group be willing to share X, Y, and Z? If you were in the room, I don't know. You know the community better than I on that. I mean, if it's an obvious issue that people are aware of, likely. I mean, we want people to share. We want to get honest data and information. And like I said, the list of positive things, I'll guarantee you, you will be very proud when you hear that list. That's
Regardless of whether you
that's
attend,
always-
we will report back to the board and share that, and then you'll get a written copy of that feedback.
And then the third part of my set of questions is, field searches are sometimes inevitable. What happens if we reach a point where we have 3 finalists and they come to interview and none of them are acceptable for some reason, or something comes up in the interview process that didn't come up in background checks? What happens at that point?
It hasn't happened before, but obviously that, I would hope that the process and the thoroughness of the process on the front end and the vetting that we do, we spend a lot of time, a lot of energy, both aggressively recruiting and then vetting candidates per the qualities or characteristics you're looking for. So I haven't personally experienced that, and I would say that would be a result of a process that wasn't executed as thoroughly as it needs to be. And then I think we have a conversation around what does that mean, and perhaps starting over or looking at some modified form of the process, perhaps going deeper in the candidate pool and exploring other applicants that maybe didn't make the final cut. Those couple of options.
And I just have one quick follow-up question. I noticed on your website that in addition to doing superintendent searches for districts, you guys also provide candidates with things like resume preparation services. Have you ever run into a conflict of interest situation where you've sold your services to a candidate and that candidate is then applying to the district and you've like helped them prepare their resume?
Not that I'm aware of, but I could certainly check and provide.
Okay, it would be good to know if that's ever come up, so.
Great. Okay, Nanda?
Okay, so thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
My questions are also comprehensive with different buckets, but I will start by saying that it is possible that this might be a very unique experience for you all, where you're maybe contracted with a very diverse board in many different aspects. We know that there's not a lot of public school boards that reflect the composition that we do currently. So given that aspect, the complexity of that, what can we expect of like a working relationship with you? And very particularly, if you can kind of give some examples on how would you challenge us in certain aspects? I know you mentioned like around legal pieces, which I think is pretty a straight line, but other things that they are not necessarily on the legal realm, but it would be sort of like an expertise situation. Can you, either of you kind of
Sure,
speak a little bit?
I'll start out here. I mean, I think one of the things I would ask you to, I know there's a lot of information in the RFP, but in the back part of the RFP, there are a number of testimonials coming from districts after the hire about the communication, the relationship, the quality of the candidates. You know, McPherson and Jacobson, in the proposal, we'll stand by this process to the point where if the person leaves in the first 2 years, we'll repeat the process for free. The exception would be the expenses that would come, but that's how confident we are in placing an individual. So you'll see that in the left side of your folder on the back is the I think the financial request. But that, to answer your question about what we would challenge, I'm trying to think in a search. I remember one time being nervous about what Damien just characterized about the thoroughness that we put into the background checks, vetting information, checking social media. We really want to know everything we can about that individual. If that window isn't large enough, that's where I would caution a board and ask them to please reconsider, allow us more time, because we're passionate about what I said at the beginning. Who we hire is a very, very important decision. It's worth the extra time and effort to make sure you get the right who and you find out. And we do it in a way that we ask people to also provide other recommendations of people to call rather than just calling references, if you will. So we try to dig deep, and we do a lot to vet that information out. So where we would challenge the board, again, if it's illegal or immoral or unethical,
The
something
question is
that,
like how?
how would we do that?
How would you do that?
Well,
so
I
you're a
think-
white man. There's no white men in this board. How would you challenge us given that there is no necessarily a cultural bridge
Yeah.
explicit? How would you challenge us?
I think it's
on
listening to
collaborating?
understand, and then,
Okay.
a big part of communication is listening, right? We put a lot of value and emphasis on speaking, but that's not the most important part. Am I listening to understand
Okay.
the concern that you have? Am I asking clarifying questions to be clear that I have a thorough understanding of what the issue is? And so I would say also, if you have protocols or norms or agreements as a board, because obviously you have disagreements, right? You're a diverse board. How do you resolve those? And to the extent that we can co-opt those in a meaningful way to support you in your work, that's what we want to do. I mean, let's face it, we have the same goal in mind. We want to have an excellent process that results in a really high-quality outcome that everyone feels good about. So it's in our mutual best interest to make sure that there's no contention. And if there are issues of disagreement, let's challenge ideas, not people. And that's a distinction that's important, subtle but important.
Thank you. So another part of the question was how, in your discussions in preparation of the RFP, given that you already said that we are in a unique position, both from our demographic perspective and demographic of our students, given that our demographics of the city is not that representation, our demographics of our board, and the explicit mission and vision that we have with our strategic framework around anti-racist work, how, what sets you apart? What you or your firm sets, or what you're prepared to kind of expand to ensure that the demographics that you are both being able to bring and attract the demographics, the pool that we're looking for, and is there particular tools or strategies around that you can name?
Yeah, it's a great question. Didn't mention it in my introduction, but I have experience working in Chicago Public, coaching principals, and very proud of that opportunity. So all of my experience isn't limited to Northeast Wisconsin as it relates to that. The other thing I would say, and it's important for you to know, is that I'm a member of the Urban Superintendent Association of America. There's approximately 100 of the best, what I would call some of the best superintendents in America. They actually asked me to present to them during their summer conference in Boise. So I've got a strong and deep network and access to some of the most diverse and capable educational leaders in the country, and I've already been thinking about individuals that I could potentially call up. In fact, before I even knew about this opening and this opportunity, I had made arrangements to shadow who I think is one of the leading African-American women superintendents on the East Coast. I'm spending a day with her in early October because I wanted to have the value of that experience, and I would consider her a close personal friend, and she's embraced that opportunity with open arms. I'll also then go up to Washington, D.C., where the League of Innovative Schools is convening, so there's about 80 national superintendents. Again, a pretty rich and diverse group of thought leaders with specific emphasis on technology, and so I've got access to that group from a recruiting standpoint. So between the Urban Superintendent Association and the League of Innovative Schools, and I would encourage you to Google either one of those organizations, I feel like I've got access to some of the best educational leaders in the country, many of whom I would consider close personal colleagues or friends. So if I don't know someone, they clearly know someone, and I can leverage that for your benefit.
Thank you for so much the richness of the examples from a candidate pool perspective. Can you bridge to also how are you thinking about given that we're going to also expect a diverse representation, a diverse voice on a community engagement process? What some of the strategies you have used or you're planning to use to, when you're speaking to Hmong elders, refugees, to queer and trans folks, so what's some of those things that you can...
Well, any consultant who comes in here and claims to understand the community really well is being disingenuous. You know it better than anyone, and while we have a working knowledge, there are certain things we don't know, and we're going to rely on you for that. I know you have translators, for example, for your board meetings, like if you call in advance and if someone wants to come and doesn't speak English as a first language. So I think that's a great example and a great service, and I think we would lean on your knowledge, awareness, and expertise of the community to help us with that process. I don't want to walk into a situation where there's surprises. That doesn't reflect favorably on our firm or you as a board or this school district. So let's be sure we clearly understand the dynamics that we're dealing with and try to anticipate potential challenges or issues like that, and then just collaborate in making it happen.
Thank you.
We will have a point of contact in the district, and there's a page within the planning document that spells out all of our duties and responsibilities and all the duties and responsibilities of the point of contact. The point of contact would help us anticipate some of those issues or challenges. It's not a board member because you've got too many other things to take care of, but I would hope, whether it's Barb or someone else who's got a good working knowledge of some of the issues here, that we would rely and lean heavily on that person to help anticipate that type of thing.
And from your firm is the two of you plus the
Plus
data
Janet
person?
Dixon.
That's the team. All right.
Now, in the case of the listening sessions, we've got 3 days of listening sessions due to the size of your district. Typically, we do those in a day. We're going to devote 3 days to engaging your community, and we're willing to bring in additional support, including diverse consultants to help us with that, recognizing that we want to engage in a really meaningful way.
Thank you. All right, just timing, so we'll move on to Ali and then Sylvia.
All right. How will your firm take an intersectional approach to inclusion to ensure that candidates are a diverse group of people? You've spoken to that pretty extensively, so I'm like, yeah. What language will you use to ensure members of the LGBTQ community are engaged to apply? So I noticed when you had the breakdown of genders, Green Bay has trans-inclusive policy. Madison has trans-inclusive policy. I noticed in every single submission that folks used he or she frequently, and you know. So how would you make sure that the LGBTQ community is, you know, encouraged to apply? How will you represent the district's ability to support diverse leaders? So how will you talk about why this is a good place for candidates of color, for candidates with disabilities, for candidates of color with disabilities who are LGBTQ to be leaders? How will you talk about our ability to support those people in this community?
I'll start with the very last piece that you shared, how we would do that. To me, that's part of telling the story of Madison, is it not? The diversity, the richness of so many cultures here, and then you add the university influence and potential and impact. I think there's a lot to sell to any population given that richness and that diversity. So, I mean, that, I think you have the ability to do that here, unlike many other places.
In terms of the way we market and promote, I've asked our home office in Omaha to assist with that, because candidly I haven't been asked that question before, nor have I been involved in a search where that's been a point of emphasis. So there again, I think from an HR standpoint, I think we have something to learn. I love the fact that within your strategic plan, especially when you talk about Black excellence, you come right out and say there's certain things we don't know. As a school district, we need the engagement and help of the community. You come right out and you say that you're strong in continuous improvement, right? But you have work to do in innovation, and we need help in innovation. So in that particular case, I guess I would ask from an HR standpoint, let's collaborate on that to make sure that the way we're doing that is reflective of your values. So you know that better than maybe we do, given our lack of experience in that area, so let's collaborate.
Great, thank you. Xavier?
So I think we have a community that wants to have a really hands-on process with the search. Can you over your years of experience in leading searches, can you highlight some practices or strategies you think really stand out in terms of how you embrace community engagement and what makes your search process very transparent? And just any lessons or insights you've learned over the years in conducting these types of searches.
I think it goes back to Brian's introductory remarks. This is a relational process. We can talk procedure, we can talk process all we want. We've got a great system. At the end of the day, it's about quality of people, treating others with respect, engaging in a vulnerable, authentic, and open way. I hope that the way we're coming across tonight is reflective of what you could expect to see and hear back from stakeholders, that these individuals were real, they were authentic, they were humble, they had experience and they were willing to share that, and yet they were open to the idea that they didn't know everything, and we're okay with acknowledging that rather than making up an answer to sound or look good, and very collaborative in the process. I think that's the value proposition that we bring to the table is, real people doing important and meaningful work in a human way. At the end of the day, how do we engage in a very human and open way? So,
I would just add within that process, just the phrase "no surprises." Say what you mean what you say. We have the process, we have the agreement of phase 1, phase 2 through phase 5. This is what is entailed, and this is how it plays out. And it has been replicated and it's been revised slightly. To answer your question, what's different from one district to another? Some districts have suggestions, so it's not like it's cut in stone that it has to be exactly that way, but there are certain components that are effective in terms of you following that order and sharing that information. So I think the transparency to the community, and that's a compliment to the community that they want to be actively involved, and that's music to our ears, right? Because as educators, we want the whole community to support such an important decision, the leadership of superintendent of a school this size. That's, I think, just really listening carefully and paraphrasing. Like I said, we were transparent in the sense of we could just take notes during those input sessions. We have the ability to put that up on a screen and make sure what we are hearing and paraphrasing is exactly what the intent is of an individual. You and I can say the same thing, but it might mean two different things. We want to make sure we're clear, and that goes back to all the diversity and understanding one another. Really.
Sabian, we're an extension of you as a board, and we take that responsibility very seriously. I want others in the community, when they have the opportunity to interface with us, to say the board made a smart choice, the board made a good choice. These individuals listen, these individuals care, these individuals are doing more than a job. They have the best interests of our school system and our community in mind, and that's portrayed through their attitude and their actions.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great, thank you. And then just one last question, follow-up with the community engagement piece. As Savion mentioned, we have strong partners in our community, I think, and hearing the voices of our teachers particularly, right, in this process is so important, and our strong relationship with the teachers union. And I'm just wondering how your experience around working with teachers in our unions, in really helping them and engaging them and being part of the process throughout the process, and not just like one engagement session. Can you give me experience or an example?
My experience is with the breakout, if you do it in a day, in Madison's case, 3 days, you could do this by level, might make more sense. Like elementary, middle, and high school, because of the magnitude of how many teachers. Certainly you want the union leadership invited. They could be present at all three. Typically though, to answer your question, it has been one session with that group, and then one session with the Chamber of Commerce, other leaders in Madison, Chief of Police, Mayor, Chamber of Commerce, then all the internal and external. And when I say internal, I think it's very important to include support staff, bus drivers, not just the cooks. I mean, the supervisors. Very important to get those voices around the table. So, for that reason, thinking this through, we would need more hands on deck to do community engagement here and to do it really well. I mean, that's
great.
Good question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I would just say 29 years of experience, hundreds of teachers in my school system. We do a community engagement survey, or rather a perception engagement survey with our staff. 98% indicated that the superintendent is a positive reflection of our school system in response to my leadership last year, and that was 70% of our employees. We have 1,000 employees. I know you have 5,000, so about a fifth the size of you. So I only offer that not
That's
to
very
try
impressive.
to impress you, but to impress upon you that
That is a high number.
I'm very proud of that, and work hard to ensure that people are treated well and valued and respected. And so you've got an ambitious goal that deals with thriving, right? Thriving schools, thriving teachers, thriving students. So to me, this is just an extension of that effort, and I think that's the way we contextualize it as we talk to teacher leaders and union leadership. How can we embody it within that strategic idea that you've already put on paper? So to me, this is just an extension of that.
Gloria, another belief, and it's research-based. I respect so much what you just asked, particularly in regard to teacher involvement in the process. This isn't to put the superintendent down at all, but the research clearly shows the most important decision and impact on learning is putting a quality teacher in front of students. Now, obviously, superintendent leadership is important. I don't want to downgrade that, but from my training right here about 5 blocks away, that's key, and it's critical that they do have a voice and that there's harmony between you, the superintendent, and the teacher union in the district. Your relationship working with the superintendent, those characteristics that you identify, and then really holding to that when you make that final decision to hire, that's when that match comes together. It's a very good question.
Great, thank you. All right, those were all our questions. We have some time to for you to ask us questions if you have any of us.
One of mine would be, I know listening to your board meeting, you are meeting again on the 9th. What do you see as your timeline for making a decision?
It'll be the 9th.
It'll be on the 9th?
On the 9th.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
very good.
Anything else?
We want to get into it fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that was my question, Kate, is help us understand what that means, because while we want to support you in that goal, we also want to make sure there's a balance between, being thorough and also having the time to recruit and appropriately vet the candidates. Typically, it's a 2 to 3 month process.
Yep.
Does that square with what you're thinking of as a board?
It does. We have a timeline that I don't have printed in front of me right now, but we do have a draft timeline, accepting that it's a draft timeline, and that the reason we're looking for a vendor to support us is that you guys have more knowledge about kind of tactically how to accomplish this successfully. Directionally, that timeline would have us making an offer in February with forums in early January here in Wisconsin, and I believe kind of in-person interviews or interviews of some nature right before Christmas. That's my memory, and Deirdre's nodding, which means we're directionally correct here. So that's the draft timeline we have out there, and I think certainly for whoever we end up selecting, we need to finalize what that looks like given your experience and knowledge. So.
And I just have one more question, and that question is there anything at all in the back of your mind that you're wondering about, McPherson and Jacobson, or maybe Brian or Damien, that we didn't bring out in this interview? Anything. We will not offend us with this. I want to make sure that you understand what we have to offer, and the transparency is real. I mean, any question that you have that...
I do, actually.
Sure, go ahead, Kate,
appreciate
please.
You asking me. I just wanted to kind of drill down. Chris asked, or maybe Ananda, you did, in terms of who exactly is working with us. Can you guys just get a little more tactical on, who's our primary point person that's our everyday call? I mean, you're an active superintendent in a not-small district. I appreciate that's kind of a big job. So just, can you talk a little bit about very tactically who's our phone friend and who's the broader network of support?
Certainly, that given what's going on in Damien's life, if that becomes an issue as being the lead, then I could certainly take it. And we're willing to add we talked about the third person with Janet for the community engagement piece. Depending upon the feedback we get from you to reach out to the community, we've already talked with the office, we could add a 4th person to help and assist with that. But if your concern is with follow-through or not...
I just want to understand tactically, who does what.
I see.
Yeah,
Right? Because it's not all 3 people doing everything.
And it's important for you to know I've got 18 consulting days in my contract, so my board has been really generous in terms of allowing for this. And there's a benefit to my district as well, because I'm going to learn and see things that are going to make me a better leader, and I'll bring those home. So my board values and appreciates the opportunity. So I would be the point person. I've got the days in the contract to commit. to the project. I take this very seriously, and I'm really selective, candidly, for the reasons that you brought up, Kate. So if I wasn't prepared to make that investment of time and energy, I wouldn't be here tonight, because I want to make sure at the end of this, you feel great about it. I feel great because I'm making an investment in you and the community, and there's a win-win relationship. So Brian and I then work very closely, and then Janet, our other partner, would be supporting those efforts. And then we have a point of contact here in the district.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Bless you.
Anybody else have anything?
Can you talk really briefly about what a successful match looks like for you all?
So let's go back to phase 1. As a board, you identified the following 5 characteristics. To me, the answer to that question is the person that best meets the 5 characteristics in what you and the community and the staff in general in the district, that's the match. And certainly, after a thoroughly vetted, reference-checked, that person is really checked out through every way that we can check them out. But that's the match in my mind. It's the match.
It's a unanimous 7-0 vote, and every one of you is casting that vote decisively because it's so obvious and apparent to you that this is the right leader to take us forward. And let's face it, urban superintendent jobs are 3.5 to 4.5 on average. That's not good enough. We know that systematic, deep, sustainable change is minimally a 4 to 7 year process. We've had that previously, and hopefully you saw the impact that can have. So the issue isn't the cost on the front end for the service that you're providing. The issue is the opportunity loss and the cost when you lose a person in the first 3.5 to 4.5 years. So just to give you an example, Little Rock, Arkansas, search we did, here are the qualifications that their board came up with: an ethical and courageous leader who possesses great leadership skills, an experienced analytical academician who implements best practices in student achievement, an excellent communicator who can build consensus through the community, a culturally sensitive administrator who has progressive experience in similar-sized urban schools, a wise recruiter who will align talented personnel in their proper roles. Their board came up with that, and then it was our job to find the match so that the board, when it came to the vote, said, absolutely, this is the person. The process worked. Trust the process. If we do our homework on the front end, I'm confident it'll result with a great choice on the back end. 80% of the candidates we placed in the last 5 years are still in the role that we hired them for. That's a pretty good statistic. I think that's better than the national average. I think it's as good or better than the private sector. So we're very proud of that fact. Almost 50% of those we've placed in the last 15 years are still in the role we hired them for, out of those 750. So pretty strong track record, and I guess I'll close with that because I think that's meaningful. Thank you so much. Delight to be here.
I do have one more question before we close out. Sorry, I know we're out of time, but can you talk about just internal and local candidates in your other searches and how that has worked out for you?
Yeah, I think that's part of our early discussion is, are there any internal candidates who you consider to be viable? Mm-hmm. And it's important for us to know that on the front end, two aspects. So number one, is that the case? And it's important for us to know that. Number two, are there any candidates who were once here who have gone elsewhere that you are interested in us recruiting back to Madison? That's another effective strategy that we've used in the past. So we would have that conversation early in the process. And frankly, you've got probably some names in mind that are important for us to know.
And how has that worked in your other searches?
You know, it's mixed.
Okay.
Frankly, I think my opinion is if there's an internal successor who the board regards as a really highly qualified candidate, then from a transition standpoint, that always works better, or almost always works better. Whether or not that's the case here, I don't know. I know you've got an interim right now with Jane, and my understanding is she's not being considered, right? As a candidate, and you made that public and made that clear. So are there others within the system that you're thinking about, and we want to know that? And you know, the value of that is if you've been able to create that bench strength as an organization, that's an asset, because the person can avoid all of the transitional challenges that come with trying to get to know the staff, the community, policies, the board. So there are some advantages to that, but that's really got to be predicated on you collectively telling us that this is a person we're seriously considering, and they're not guaranteed anything, right? They've got to go through the process, but we want to know that.
Great. Okay, thanks.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was
Yeah,
nice meeting
appreciate
all of
your
you.
time. Thank you.
Are we doing a 5 minute?
Thank you. We'll start back in,
5 minutes, I need to talk.
5 minutes, yeah. basics of the process here. You will have a maximum of 15 minutes to do a presentation for us. And just share a little bit about yourself and your experience and so forth. And then each of us will have a question for you. And then we'll leave about 10 minutes for questions that you have of us. Okay, so let's, Barb will be our timekeeper. And she just walked in. Yay! And she brought chocolate. So we'll get started? Okay. So when Barb will tell me when our 15 minutes is up. All right, go ahead.
Good, thank you. Good, well, thank you so much for the opportunity to spend time with you tonight and to get to know you. And we are very excited about, thank you, about working with you. We hope at the end of the evening you will actually feel our energy and enthusiasm and sense our expertise and experience, because we are here to work with you and for you. And to that end, we have put together, rather than having a literally death by PowerPoint slideshow, we put everything in a series of numbered handouts. So we have and we'll talk about this as we go through it a bit. And then I also wanted to include a one-pager. We're big on one-pagers, just to show some of our track record, and I'll be referring to that in just a second. I'm the president of Hazard Young & Teen Associates. Been a superintendent and state superintendent of Illinois, and my whole life has been literally devoted to serving students needed, historically underrepresented students, starting with 24/7 residential program in Harlem, New York in 1969 through the Better Chance program. And fortunately just had the opportunity to submit a chapter for a book called Have Nots to Have, Minority Achievement and Talent Development. And so as you sense and hear about our experience as well from my colleagues here, we take this incredibly serious and are driven by this mission of assuring opportunity and access for every child every day. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to, or at least ask them to introduce themselves, our two great Wisconsin superintendents, former superintendents, outstanding leaders known across the country and certainly throughout the state. Sarah Jerome and Pat Newdecker. So whoever wants to introduce themselves first, go right ahead, please.
I'm delighted to be with you tonight. We're thrilled at this opportunity. I have spent 23 years as a superintendent, 15 of those years in Wisconsin and 8 in Illinois. Thank you very much. 15 in Wisconsin and 8 in Illinois, 46 years all told in education. And had experience kindergarten through graduate school in terms of teaching and administering. In terms of being brief, and I know that's one of the virtues here, I want to just talk to you a little bit about my credentials in terms of equity and social justice, because I think those are things that you have talked about and have great passion for, and I want to just share some of my background there. I have a Duke master's and a doctorate in education, and did my postdoctoral work at Marquette for my superintendent's license, and have worked in both urban and large school systems, starting with Prince William County in Woodbridge, Virginia, and Cypress Fairbanks in Houston, Texas, and in Rockford, Illinois. I spent time with the court-appointed 7th Circuit Federal Court-appointed master in a desegregation suit, and one of my tasks was working with closing the gap in terms of achievement with those students and reporting that progress to the courts. In addition, I have very recently had some experience teaching at Concordia University in a program called Project Invest, and that has been a program funded in both public and private ways to encourage teacher aides, primarily of color, to become graduates and teachers. And the class that I taught was all African American women from inner city Milwaukee, Racine, and Kenosha, working on their baccalaureate, and our course was learning theory. And it was a wonderful experience in terms of seeing the progress and how proud they were of the progress they were making. Some of them first entries into college of their families. And so it is definitely makes a difference to have an investment of time and resources in that program. In addition, I would like to just share with you my commitment to hiring practices. And the Arlington Heights School District experience was one where there was a large commitment to trying to diversify our staff and to creating an opportunity for people to have experiences and interaction with people who did not look like them. And so hiring people who had different backgrounds was an important goal, in addition to our goal of global citizenship. So I think that might hit on some of the high points that I wanted to share. I do have a great connection to Madison, have served on the Wisconsin School Music Association board for many, many years, know some of your administrators and teachers quite well, particularly the music ones. So it's been a close relationship. Pat.
Great, thank you. And I echo that too. Thank you so much for having us. I'm excited to be here, and I will start out with a similar message that reading your material and certainly knowing what you're about, I can assure you that my beliefs and core values are very much aligned with the work that you're trying to do. And certainly I practice and believe in inclusive practices and promise that we will go about this work with great intentionality. Important in the kind of work that we're all trying to do. I'm also a lifelong educator. I finished my career as a superintendent, predominantly in Oconomowoc. I retired from Oconomowoc about 6 years ago, and I've been doing search work and other professional work since then. I have a small career in education, beginning when we lived in Illinois, in Aurora, outside of Chicago, and also in Eau Claire before we moved to this area. So I'm familiar with our two states, certainly. I've been very active while I was superintendent in AASA. Both Sarah and I had the honor, if you will, to be elected female presidents of AASA. We were number 2 and 3 since 1835, the year 1835. So we were honored to be selected by our peers to help with that organization. And we continue to do work in leadership development, attracting all kinds of candidates and making sure that we are developing superintendents, especially for schools across our country. Since my somewhat semi-formal retirement, I've done some work in higher ed, specifically at Alverno College in Milwaukee, where I'm the director of the Administrative Leadership Program, a part-time position. If you are not familiar with Alverno, the undergraduate students are predominantly first-generation college students. Alverno last year had the distinction of being designated a Hispanic serving institution. We are the only one, I believe, in the state of Wisconsin. And I don't share that I had any responsibility in getting us there, but I can tell you that it has been a tremendous learning experience for me to have hands-on experience with the kind of students and beliefs that I've talked about my entire career. So that has been fascinating. I also participated, Alverno does a wonderful project in the summer called Urban Plunge, and I participated in that, where you really immerse yourself in some of the quickly growing, almost majority communities in the Milwaukee area to learn some of their issues in that. So I share it only to bring a sensitivity forward. I'm a local gal. I actually grew up around Chicago, but I've spent most of my married life and career in Wisconsin. I did my master's and my PhD at UW-Madison, so I'm very Madisonized, very, very proud of that. And currently I'm serving on Dean Diana Hess's School of Education Board of Advisors at the university, so I'm very, very proud of that too. Love to stay active and busy. I think you'll hear that as we move forward. So thanks again for having us.
we wish we had time to hear your stories.
Yeah.
But I will proceed because this process will involve us working very, very closely together, and I hope that we will have time to hear all of your stories in the future. But I'm going to continue with the first few pages here, and I'm not one to read slides. I know you all are accomplished readers. But I also want to point out that these are not your standard internet stock photo. These are your students, and we seldom see such a photogenic bunch. But we tried to pick out ones that fit with the topic. So why Madison Matters on page 2 is truly because of your commitment to students like Jalonzo and to all of your 26,000 students. We know about your commitment to a culture of excellence. We've read through your community engagement report. We've read through all your data. We've read through the student surveys. And I don't know who runs your research department, but they certainly do a fabulous job. And so we are here to work with you and for you to find the leader who will be the perfect fit. Moving to page 3, we do have a broad and deep national network, and you'll hear shortly how we use that network to recruit candidates. For searches of this size and larger, only about half the candidates come through the application process. The rest are aggressively and assertively recruited from across the country. And I think you'll see that we are committed to equity, not just in name, but walking the talk, and we believe that actions speak louder than words. That includes our own network of associates, and it also includes this handout in your packet. Since 2015, we have served 25 districts of 20,000 or more. We only have data on 19 of those. Since I became president, I've really wanted to get this data. But 53% of our slated candidates, more than half of our slated candidates, were men or women, historically underrepresented populations. So again, this walks the talk. This is not just applications. These are candidates given to the board to slate. 32% were women. The national statistic for women superintendents is 21%. So we believe in walking the talk at Hazard, Young, Matee and Associates, and I think our record speaks for itself. Page 4, and I love this shot from East High here, because we are about engagement and communication. You'll hear shortly from Sarah about our in-depth engagement process, where we really work with focus groups. I ran the search in Glendale. We worked with more than 20 focus groups. We did a search outside Cincinnati. We had 47 focus groups, in addition to individual interviews. We deeply engage a community. In Glendale, we had over 1,500 responses to the community survey in 3 different languages. And this is what we will do for you. So with that, I'm going to move on to the signature search process and hand this over to Sarah, I believe, Pat, on page 5, and she'll talk a little more about the engagement process as we go through this.
Great.
So all yours, Pat.
Sarah and I are going to talk about the engagement and recruitment phase, slides 6 and 7 of your notes. And we're each going to take apart and highlight that for you, but please know that these 2 phases happen simultaneously. So this really isn't a linear process. These are things that really are happening in tandem with each other. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the engagement phase, and I think through our career as well as our search work, we know for sure that engagement is about listening. Perhaps in our profession sometimes we confuse that it's about telling. It isn't about telling, it's about listening. So our engagement process is really predicated on listening to your community, your constituents, your staff, your students, all your stakeholder groups, if you'd like to call it, but you're really to find out what they say about you, about your district, and about your future and your future leader. So I'll just walk you through briefly, and then we can come back to that. If we are fortunate to be selected, we'll meet with you very quickly in the next couple weeks to establish a planning meeting that will establish our calendar. At the same time, we'll be doing some back work, which we've already begun, actually, looking for certain candidates to make sure we can tell you firsthand that we know available people that we would like to tap for you. We have a district survey that we conduct. It is research-based, and it pretty much illuminates for you the state of your district and also the leadership profile that people are looking for. Hazard Young and Atia has a very strong analytical arm. So you will, when you have time to look through your packet, you'll see a very, I think, impressive report and style of reporting that gives you the information that you need in an organized way, and one that can be very publicly understood as well. So we would begin the survey. The survey can be offered in multiple languages if you desire, and we also will tabulate the demographics in any capacity that you'd like to set them up. So any that you would like surveyed, we can accommodate that as well. We move then into interviews, and interviews take the look of individual. Perhaps each of you as a board member individually, certainly key stakeholders, people that you would suggest to us that you want interviewed individually. We are very, very comfortable doing that. We also do group interviews. Sometimes you may ask us to look at, for example, a select teacher group or a select parent group or a select group of whomever, and we are very comfortable doing that. We hold very large forums and focus groups as well. And that's when I know in your work and in your request you asked about transparency and about engagement and inclusion. That's really where it's more than optics. It is a real process that asks people to come forward and share in this important work that you're doing. And as you've heard, we are prepared to do as many as it takes to really get a handle on your community and what your people are asking. From that information, we create a profile. And that profile does two things. We present it to you first to make sure that we have captured and that we've represented what this search is all about. And then that profile becomes sort of the backdrop, if you will, for soliciting candidates. So they're able to read to and learn more about who you are and what you're looking for. I think we all know this marriage is really about a fit. And so we are committed to bringing you the very, very best that is the right fit for your community. Later, when you get to the finalist phase, if you desire, we also would do public days with your candidate if they are interested, and there are sometimes confidentiality issues that may have to be ironed out. But we also can engage the community all the way through the end of the process, if you so desire to share that end of the road story with you. Again, high engagement, comfortable. We certainly are comfortable with Wisconsin, Madison, and I know you're going to hear it from Sarah and I, all three of us really, but you know, these are our kids. These are Wisconsin children. We live here. This is what we're about. And whether you choose us or another firm, I really wish you the best and really, really wish you the best in getting the very best candidate. This is very, very difficult work, very important right now, and we'd be thrilled to hear from your community how we can help you.
Recruit phase, yes, that's the next step in the process, and as Pat says, it is tandem, it is simultaneous. We're already thinking about recruitment and the connections that we might activate that would bring people to the application pool. We want to clearly take advantage of what you say you want and what your community says is needed here, and translate that into finding that right person. We do it through advertising. We do it through linking and making connections to our really vast network, national network, regional network, local network of superintendents that we know, or administrators or teachers or parents that we know throughout this whole system that can recommend people to us that are the right people for us to look at, for us to vet, and then to bring to you, for you to go through that process. So it's never just one way. We don't sit here, put the application out, and wait for applicants to come to us. That's one step. There are many who will do that, and we will look at them, every application, very carefully. But we are also on the ground looking for people at the telephone, reaching out to them so that they know about Madison. We tell your story, and we encourage high-quality applicants to come forward And if they are interested, we nurture that interest. If they say, oh no, I'm not ready, and we know that they would be just the right candidate, we go back to them more than once, just to say, you might want to rethink that, because this may be a wonderful opportunity for you. So
We are out of time, so if you just want to finish up.
oh, okay.
I know
That
time
was
flies.
so quick, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
it was.
So anyway, once we post this and we have the applications, we give you back the analytics on who's applied, what the demographics of that looks like. So you know that we are trying to meet the criteria that you have set. You've said you wanted, and we want to deliver that.
And to close, your questions. So it's time for your questions. And in the spirit of transparency and walking the talk, we actually provided in brief written answers, because we think it should be a public record. And so there you go. So we will be glad to expound on those if you wish, but thank you very much for your time.
And that's included in the material.
Excuse me?
That's included in the material.
It is, yeah, on the handout they gave you pages.
Okay.
13,
Mia
14.
starts on page 13, and she is repeated on pages 14 and 15. There you go.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. Let's go ahead and start with questions. Kate, you want to get us started?
So I'm going to read just so we're keeping them the same, but racial equity strategies, or I guess a little bit to racial equity strategies that you are using and experience with anti-racist leadership, how you can access this type of talent, and what the community and staff engagement process would look like to support that.
Sure. So let me talk for a moment about in a little more depth about the engagement process, and then maybe one of you can talk about accessing the talent. Well, the individual interviews with you and key stakeholders are important. So when we've done searches, and I co-led Denver and Glendale, so I'll talk about, for example, we interviewed personally the mayor, we interviewed some city council members, we interviewed people from the faith-based community who the board members picked out. The focus groups were determined by the board. Which stakeholder groups are important to you? Oftentimes it's a group of special education parents, or maybe parents of the gifted and talented, Hispanic, African American, and Glendale was Armenian, a huge Armenian community. And so we set that up at the first planning meeting with the board. As far as the survey, we provided in English and Spanish. It's research-based. We can add a few custom questions if necessary, and we can provide it in additional languages. Again, we've got Armenian, Mandarin, all different languages. We can turn that around in 24 hours, the results on that, and we expect about 1,500. The town halls, we like to have forums, maybe one at East High, one at West High, or West and Lafayette, whatever. We also do a community, a virtual forum, because not everybody can get out. And so I run a virtual forum. So we have people can sit in their homes and can contribute and ask that. So it's a significantly in-depth engagement process. And again, as Pat said, we write the results into a leadership profile report and engagement criteria. And I think there's a sample, just a survey report in your packet. And you want to, either of you want to talk more about how we get candidates besides just through applications?
Sure, sometimes we use the Wisconsin story or Wisconsin analogy that we don't subscribe to the deer hunter methodology where we sit back and hope somebody walks by, if you will. This really is going to be an aggressive search, and we will reach out into our network. So in addition to HYA having a reputation that it does nationwide, and I believe we should mention that the HYA website lists every single position that's open, whether it's HYA's search or not. That drives a lot of traffic to that website. We get a lot of action, a lot of candidates looking at positions. So in addition to HYA's quality reputation, Sarah and I both have personal connections nationwide from our work in AASA. And to be honest, especially with what would have been called minority or underrepresented populations, ALAS and certainly NAPSI, the two superintendent groups that are made up of minority men and women. And we have a lot of first name connections and contacts. So I really see us using our careers and the path that we've both chosen and the network that we've established to really make sure we can show Wisconsin in the best light, but also bring you people that you might not have otherwise had exposure to. So I think that, I hope that answers for you how. The how is what, as we all know, the how is what's, we can talk it, but I promise you we can do it. Thank you.
Great. My question, I have two actually. I'm going to break it into two parts. One is on the experience you have working with communities around the size of Madison. So, you know, we are a university town, at the same time we're rather unique. Do you have a strong history working with schools around our district size?
Yes, so the that one pager in here,
Yep.
These are all districts of 20,000 and more that we've done. And again, Denver was 92,000. I worked with Denver. Glendale was almost identical size, 4 high schools, 26,000 students, in an alternative school as well. So, yeah, some are connected with universities and some are. Crowley, Texas, not necessarily, but certainly USC was a partner with Glendale, both the University of Denver and
what year
being
was
right
that?
in there. So yeah, we're used to that. In fact, we had a slated candidate come from the university for the Denver search. So we're familiar with that, and I actually served in a university town in Palo Alto, literally in the shadow of Stanford University, and learned a lot about design thinking and all sorts of other things. So universities, I think, can be great resources, but the experience is extensive.
And what year was Denver? Just quick.
Excuse me?
What year was Denver? I'm just curious.
Denver was this year. And it was a very short timeline. We started in August and placed somebody in December of, and then. So it was tough.
My second question is in a totally different vein,
Yeah.
but also on diversity. As a special ed advocate, disability advocate, I'm interested in your views on inclusion and how you make sure that individuals with disabilities are able to access the process.
Sure. So a few ways, and we have, and again, you can please jump in. I'll give a first start. So we think it's important to have those focus groups first of all, for parent advocates, for parents, for individuals with disabilities in places that are accessible. So whether, and I don't know your setup in Madison well enough, what kind of centers there are, but I will tell you where I worked before. For example, we had a county center where we were an inclusive district, but we educated students from the county, so we would hold meetings in there, completely accessible. We found that also frankly, the virtual forum, when we did that in Glendale especially, when people could be at home or be with a caregiver and listen and respond and have somebody speak for them if they were not able to speak. We use Padlet technology in our focus groups, and Padlet's a free application.
Yeah.
You're familiar with it. And it's super.
They aren't, I am.
Yeah, okay, great. And it is so
I'm
helpful.
sorry, Ananda, I
Yeah.
apologize.
Because people can do that there,
Yeah,
and so they make sure their voice is heard, and then we leave it open after the focus group. So it's critically important. Yeah. You're familiar with that, obviously.
How do you use your virtual forum?
The virtual forum, we use either Zoom. We have a Zoom license for 500. We found that's the best. We can use Google Meets, but we like Zoom.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, it's both phone and video.
And phone and video, yeah, both. Right.
And I think it goes without saying too that sometimes the non-school sites are as important. Whether they're accessible, it's more about just perception sometimes. So holding these forums in non-school sites in addition to school locations we have found to be equally important.
I appreciate the correction, you're right. I keep forgetting the DPI thing. You think I would remember.
All right. Chris?
So I have kind of a three-part question here, and the first one is how you get more specific about how you see your working relationship with us throughout this process.
Sarah, do you want to take that?
Absolutely. We see ourselves as your ambassadors. We are taking your message and your mission and doing our very best to find people that we think meet that and bring them to you. And we want to engage with you. We want to listen to you carefully. We want to give you our very best advice, but we also recognize we are your employees and we do your bidding. But we also want you to know that we have experience that we don't want to withhold. If you want to hear what our best advice is, we want to give it. But we also respect that it's your decision. And we will do our very best to help support that and guide you in this process. We recognize that you're a relatively new board and that you might have some questions. We have had, I would say, maybe 100 years' experience collectively working with boards.
That's true.
And so we might have some things that would be useful to you and would want to share those if you want us to share them. And we would do that gladly.
And Pat, go ahead.
If I may, too quickly, HY also provides a board portal. You have your own electronic portal where records, information, files, applicants are kept. It's a confidential portal, unique to you, and you have 24/7 access to all the materials, all the applications, and we enter into a confidentiality agreement, of course, because you are reading people's personal records. But you have that at your access throughout the whole process. That doesn't come to you at the end. So you have, through HYA's organization, you have your own Madison Area School District portal.
So just a quick follow-up to that. The proposal you sent us said that Sarah Pat would be working with us, and I just wanted to confirm that and get more specific about, like, who's our point person? What are your specific roles in working with us?
I believe Sarah and I would be the lead.
They're the point people.
We are your people on the ground and people who are your neighbors and live
We
here.
are yours 24/7.
We are yours.
And would others in HYA be working with us as well?
Right, so in my role in this will be, and I'm also a Williams Bay resident, my wife is from Evansville, so a quasi-resident anyway. But they, yeah, my role is really, I run the virtual forum in the back office and take care of the survey administration, so I'm more of the back office support, but I also will assist with interviews and focus groups and forums as needed. And again, it is 24/7. You'll have all our well, you have now, I think, with the cards and packets. Our cell phones are in there. And as Sarah said, we've worked with boards for probably 100 years.
Plus.
I was 29, 30.
Yeah.
And so we're used to that relationship, and most importantly, very comfortable and open with it.
And I think the details of that will become clearer once you have selected us and going through that calendar and designing exactly where each of us will be when, and then having the opportunity to interact with you around those particular meetings.
So the second part of my three parts here is about community engagement, which you've already spoken about quite extensively, so I don't want to make you spend more time talking about that. But one piece of that I'd like some more information about is during the actual meetings, forums, what do you see as the board role? Do you see the board being present? Do you see the board doing more than being present?
So we when I've done this, I prefer not to have the board members there, but we're very, that's me personally. I'll let Pat and Sarah answer that. But I always like to have a board member introduce the community forum, to be there to introduce and talk about how important this is, to give it really a sense of gravity and credibility that this really matters to the board. But then, you know, I'm going to excuse myself, or we're going to excuse ourselves because we want to have this third-party input. So I think that's how, when I've done searches in the past, I found most effective. But I don't know about you all, maybe.
I've had experience both ways.
Yeah.
In communities that have considerable dissension. Sometimes it's better not to have the board present, because sometimes community members have things to say about the board, and they feel somewhat less intimidated if the board isn't there. But our job is to listen and to bring all of that information back to you, and to have you filter that too through the leadership profile.
I would agree. I've done it both ways, and in either case, we would be very clear up front that we work for you and that we are there to really solicit input and collect that on your behalf. Your community has access to you already, and we encourage them to continue that access, which I'm assuming, and I think from looking at some of your past history, people are comfortable doing. So we encourage that, and frankly, we can do it either way.
And then just to follow that up, can you get a little bit more specific about what format the information will be in from the many community meetings you do, and how you use that not just to develop the list of characteristics for the superintendent, but throughout the process of this hire?
So we have samples we can share. So we write up a report out from the focus groups. The survey is actually turned around 24 hours. That's a standard. The questions drop into that report. I think we included a sample in the packet. So you can see the survey report. In the focus group, we write an executive summary, about it's anywhere from whatever, 4 to 8 pages. But we also, you have access again to all the focus group notes are dropped into the board portal. And we have a format like you did for your own community engagement process, a fill-in form, so the recorder takes notes, and then so you can see the raw notes, and then our final report that goes to you. Both those reports go directly to the board.
And then organized by themes.
Yeah,
we come up with themes that seem to be represented with evidence.
And then the final part of my question is about failed searches, because we know sometimes searches just don't work. If we were to get to the point where you bring us 2 or 3 finalists and it turns out none of them actually are a good fit for our district, what happens?
We're going to stay with you and not charge you any more money. Hence, on the cost page, we have the boys with a broccoli, and they're smiling about it. Because we're going to stay with you till you get the right person, even if it takes another year and you need an interim for a year. I don't recall ones that we've had. I've been with a firm about 2 years now. Pat, you've been an associate longer, but we will stay with you till we get the right person. And we have not had that. Yeah, that I know. Pat, have you had?
No, I have not.
Yeah.
Nor have I.
Yeah.
It's important to know they've been happy and are still working with their boards, so and boards with them.
Yeah.
And you probably read, it's a little bit of a tangent, but you probably read too that we will not go out and poach other superintendents that we've placed. So while we talk about an excellent track record and these great candidates, if they are new in those positions, we're certainly not going to go and re-recruit them to move them into a new position. So that's, I think, demonstrates our integrity a little bit, and nor would that happen to you. Yeah. So if we bring you the best, it's with a strong commitment for long-term.
And it's all right if it gets to that point where they're not the perfect fit, because it really needs to be someone who is the perfect fit for the community. So you have our commitment to stay with you.
Great. Ananda?
Yeah, so this is a good segue. So we have the first, one of the most diverse boards in Wisconsin, the state of Wisconsin, and potentially one of the most diverse in the country for public schools. How do you see the relationship with that? Thank you.
It's representative.
How do you see your relationship with us, in particular, just speaking to disagreements or recommendations from us that you find it to not be fit beyond what is legal requirement?
Or just in general, and then Pat and Sarah could jump in with specifics. I said that on that last page. We work with you and for you. So our job will be to provide pros and cons, costs and benefits when there's conflicts, and because we want to make your selection very difficult. We want to give you a slate that you're going to go, instead of these 2 or 3 aren't right, we have 2 or 3 fabulous candidates, and make that difficult. But we're not going to recommend a candidate to you. We will provide different scenarios, different options, and again, I think the best we can do is pros and cons, and maybe bring it to similar situations that we've addressed before. But do you want? I don't know if you wanted specifics, because we all have specific stories.
Sure. Yeah, I do think in terms of having a board work together well, we have a vested interest in helping you do that, and we know that having you be a board that can discuss things, even disagree about things, and come together around a decision that ultimately is driven by the good of the students, is in everyone's best interest. And so we certainly want to facilitate that kind of conversation amongst the board members, and we'll do everything we can to do that. And that's what we have done with our own boards when we were superintendents. And
So how would you challenge us?
I would agree, and I would say that there's probably 3 big buckets that we would work from. One has to be mutual respect. You certainly are representing your community, and we represent the work you're doing. And likewise, I would assume that there would be respect for our background and our expertise. There would be no one in the room that sort of would override somebody else's thought or process, because we're all in this trying to do this work collectively. So I think that mutual respect really leads to trust, and that's very important in this process. The other is communication, because I think we all know in our roles as superintendent, but also in boards, if you have good communication, you can eliminate a lot of problems and a lot of issues. So we work hard with you to make sure you have information that you need so that you can. And then we welcome critical dialogue, because without that, none of us are growing. This is difficult work, which we don't have to tell you that. So the dialogue is essential. And I think to create the kind of environment where you respect and trust and have good communication so that you can have that dialogue is something I hope you see we'd be pretty comfortable with. I wouldn't call it conflict. I'd call it healthy dialogue.
Thank you.
So we had to challenge the board in Denver. So we presented a slate of 6 candidates, and one of the members was adamant about dropping one and including one who was, because everybody has access to the applications, including another local candidate from the university. And Hank Mitro and I did that search, and we challenged it through questions. So what is a perceived value of bringing in this person and dropping that person? How can we get to yes on this? And it turned out to be a both and. So we kept all 6 and added the 7th. And is it worth an investment of your time to bring a 7th candidate? Is it not worth investing in somebody who we slated, who has these credentials, but frankly didn't meet the diversity requirements of the board at the time, but we thought was a spectacular candidate. Neither of them made it to the finalists, which was interesting. But we thought that challenging through really questions, and here's the pros and cons of it. And that's just one specific example.
Thank you.
In a search.
So another part of the question is around what sets you apart from other firms, in particular regarding tools and assessments that you use, the upkeep or the outreach to diverse demographics of candidates around race, ethnicity, disability, gender, sexual orientation, and et cetera.
Tools?
These 2
Okay.
people. I'm serious about that, and we spent intentionally a lot of time up front introducing ourselves, because you're going to be working closely with us and the people, and we think everybody has a similar process. We think our engagement process is more robust. It's certainly broader and deeper than other firms. But it comes down to you're going to work with the people, and you have to trust and believe in the people and have that communication. So that's why we'd asked Pat and Sarah to spend some time at the beginning, getting to know them. And certainly the national network is terrific. We have a back office staff, so you get your results, you get your reports. The board portal, you can see everything. I don't know if that's a distinguishing difference. I happen to think it is. Probably the other firms will say the same things. But I think in the long run it comes down to, this is truly the A-team of leaders, and they have, and they're devoted to this search. So I don't know.
I think the tools are impressive. I'm not as familiar with the tools from other search firms. Perhaps you are, Sarah, but I think the
This
analytics
is a much more sophisticated system.
I think pretty sophisticated. Your portal that we mentioned that's customized for you. Certainly the materials you receive back in the analytics, as you've heard, the behind the scenes work, the back office that does the analytics for you. And you know, everybody loves and hates data all in one full swoop. So you can pick which side of the fence you want to be on. But it does contribute to your and our credibility. And I think that's what's really important when you have printed reports that are research-based and very much analyzed because of your community input. It gives you a very strong leg to stand on. So I think that's very, very sophisticated on the HYA end.
Thank you. Can you bridge now to the capacity or strategies to both understand, summarize, and interpret the data you'll be gathering from diverse groups? Example, like Hmong elders, refugees, immigrants, transgender communities. So what some of the strategies that you have used in the past to both understand and capture the sentiment of those communities?
So we started with the specific the focus groups for that particular for that particular group, and then we try to capture stories of people in that and their thoughts, and really probe on why do you believe this, why do you think this, tell us your story. And we schedule the focus groups for 45 minutes, and most of them will go an hour and a half, and we try to meet in smaller groups and larger groups. And that's something that we plan out. So if we have to do, whether a special, going back to Nikki's question, to be inclusive of special education representatives at different schools or different times, but we think it's important that they feel the sense of intimacy that they can share with us too. And the numbers matter, but sometimes the narrative matters even more. And then so we really put that in executive summary, pull call outs.
I think too, the access is what's going to be critical in a community your size, because none of us would want to act on assumptions without checking them with you first. So we would really, I think, rely on you to learn who are these groups and what are the new groups, how do they like to meet. Are there formal and informal communication chains within your groups? Because I think the more we're in this work, and certainly in our professional capacity, we've learned a lot about culture and how culture works and how it influences then the conversation. So I think it's fair to say we would rely on you to help us. You're the ones that really suggest and put together the groups. And we work with your central office staff as well to help organize that. And that's everything from where, what's comfortable, what time, how do you do this? And then how do these people expect to be heard? And we've learned it's different across, and again, I don't mean to create assumptions. We would want to check that with you, but I think we're sensitive to the fact that people perceive and communicate in different ways.
And we've done this with student groups. We think, I was so impressed to see your work with the student engagement, but we haven't talked much tonight about students and teachers. So we think, for example, it's important to have one meeting just with frankly, your union leadership, but others with teachers, high school, middle, elementary, another with your school administrators, but with the kids, frankly, we've done groups at every high school, 4 different high schools, and sometimes we get several students, sometimes we don't, but I think including student voice is essential in this process. So you're going to, and that's what we like to, we hear stories and then try to put this into a report that matters and gives us a picture of what they're looking. And we have some of that information already in your reports, but I think that it's time to do it again when we're looking for leaders.
And not that we're running out of time, so.
Oh, sorry.
One follow-up. Okay.
I'll just add one thing. I do think.
Oh, shoot.
There's a.
Okay.
We're excited, sorry.
Go ahead, respond, and then you follow up. Yep, go ahead.
Just that in all of this, the critical and active listening that we bring to that meeting is crucial, and we do that.
Thank you. So the 3 of you worked in Denver, or just
I was a co-leader in Denver, right.
So I'm very familiar with Denver, the system, and done some work with them.
Great.
What's some of the transferable skills or lessons learned from Denver? Because I find them to be very progressive too.
They are very
You're
progressive,
thinking.
right.
So
their community engagement process, they actually hired a local firm for community engagement. They had 80 focus groups. And it cost them 3 times as much as we were going to charge. But that was, they said, we want a local firm for their own credibility. But, one of the great learnings from there, again, is how important that having these small focus groups are. And having we did, for Denver, we did weekly reports. We did a weekly phone call with the board that the board could catch on to, and we did a weekly written report for the board. We learned for the application process, working with the board, they just wanted a cover letter that answered I think it was 2 questions. One was about an achievement gap issue, and then a resume rather than a long list of written references, and that was super helpful. It was helpful to the board, it was helpful to us, and coming to the board meetings, and so they had update sessions, the board did, on the superintendent search during their meetings, and then Hank attended most of those because he could be based out there more.
thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ali?
How will your firm take an intersectional approach to inclusion and ensure that candidates are a diverse group of people? What language will you use to ensure members of the LGBTQ community are encouraged to apply? So I've noticed in everything that folks submitted, he or she was used pretty frequently. How will you represent the district's ability to support leaders with disabilities, LGBTQ leaders, and the leadership of people of color? So how will you talk about what it means to work with this community and be supported as a diverse candidate?
Yeah. So again, I think our record of slated candidates is strong. I mean, I challenge any other firm to say they slated more than half their candidates were historically underrepresented populations. So as far as the inclusive and the transgender, I think yeah, I mean, we use they instead of he or she. I mean, we understand the pronouns. So you'll see in our materials we use Latinx versus Latino and Latina. Okay, so we understand these things. And again, I was superintendent in Palo Alto. We were the first district to have transgender policy, to have transgender washrooms. I mean, we were a leader, frankly, in the country on that. So this is something that I know the 3 of us in your roles in AASA is all about this. So I think by putting this information on the HYA website, so if you go with us, you get the premier posting, and we post everybody's position. So even if you don't go with us, it'll be posted. But if you go with us, you can put any kind of information you want on there. And so the Denver board wrote a letter about, they had a positions tag, I can't remember what they called it, it's probably still on there, about this. And I think that's an important voice of the board to put on there. And so my slides are all mixed up here, but you'll see a picture of our website, and it says here are the postings. So yours goes up there, we can put on anything you want about transgender disabilities and inclusion. And that's right up there in our materials. So Pat, Sarah, you want to add to that? What page is it?
8.
8, yeah, thank you.
I think too, it's fair to make not a distinction, but bring 2 big ideas together. One would be an understanding of the superintendent pool that we'll be talking to and with. You might know that now there are many of us working in the leadership and talent development entrance into the pipeline, because frankly, as we've all seen, underrepresented groups, they're just not there. Currently in the superintendency, about 20% are female, and we're at about a 5% percentage of what would still be called candidates of color. So we all have to be honest about the pool that we're drawing from. And I think to your point about looking at the complexity of a whole self, it isn't just gender or ethnicity, or it's all of that together. I assume that's what your question is really getting to, and how we get at that. In addition to that, though, I think our language, our presence, how we represent you as a school district, and help people understand the work environment here, the people, the community, and your mindset and your belief of the candidate that will work here is the other part of the picture as I see it. So it's how we represent within the pool, but also how we communicate who you are and what your values and beliefs, which I think in fairness we know takes a multi-dimensional approach now. It isn't a one checkbox approach anymore, so.
I do think also.
I want to move on, just that, and then want to move on because we are running out of time.
AASA is doing, that's the National Superintendent's Group, is doing a very deliberate educational piece for urban superintendents and historically underrepresented groups, urging them into the profession. And that is something that Pat and I are very closely linked to, and therefore the conversations that we are having around this table are very much a part of their curriculum. And so it's ever present, is the point I'm making here.
And as superintendents, we walk the talk of hiring. I mean, we have hired, my student services director was transgender, who I hired. So we have had this experience of hiring, and all three can tell our own stories about that, but we know it's time to move on.
Great.
But we would love to tell them at some point.
So we'll go with Savion, and Nikki will be the last
And
person. You have a question?
I actually just got answered.
Okay, great, okay.
Oh,
Awesome.
good.
Savion.
Glad to hear
We
it.
hope it was the right answer. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay, can you talk about how you plan to engage a really diverse community as three white folks, frankly, and
That's fine.
and you know, different tactics or practices that you found out over the years that really bring out the insights that the community wants. I think we have one that really wants to be involved in an intensive process.
I'll just start with my own personal experience. The first time I went to an AASA meeting, all of the presidents of that organization were sitting on stage. They were all old white men. And so I said to myself, how can I relate to that group? I'm going to run for president because that just isn't me who's up there. Although I respect these people, I thought they had done a wonderful job, but I wasn't seeing myself in them. And I think part of what we must do is bring people to our students who they can see themselves in. Those leaders, those teachers, those principals who will inspire them to reach and to stretch and to grow. And that's what our job is. And we've experienced that personally.
I would agree, and I think it goes without saying, I have never met a parent, a community member, a staff member who doesn't care about their kids. So, and I don't mean to minimize this, but it kind of, to me, sometimes doesn't matter who they are because we're all there about the kids. And I think then the way we do it and the skill set that we bring and our experience that we bring is to make people feel welcome and to feel valued and to learn from you, how do we access groups and how do we, let's be honest, check our own unintentional biases and things like that to make sure that we are representing you correctly so that we get the best input. Each one of us, we are who we are. And I still believe strongly that this kind of work begins with strong beliefs. Those beliefs turn into actions, and then those actions do turn into policies and procedures that really show people that you are who you say you are. And all I can do is an average white female, above average white female, is promise you that we'll do that.
And the locations where we hold forums and meetings matter. I mean, we
live here.
Yeah. Whether it's in the church, we've held meetings in mobile home parks, we've held them in churches, and that matters going out into the community. It's one thing to have an open door policy, it's quite another to go out through the door. And we're the kind of people that do that.
And I'll tell you a struggle that I have sometimes, and this is going to sound bizarre, but It has to do with clothing, because I know clothing sometimes is a barrier. So to mitigate those barriers, I think we have to be sensitive. We've all been professional people, you know. Do we show up with closed-toed shoes and suits in the world that we came from? But we also are very aware and sensitive to making ourselves as accessible, and I think it's about being approachable.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you do that? How do you create an environment where you're one of? I think you could find us dressed up, and I think you could find us probably
Dressed
sitting
down.
on a bar stool somewhere. So, walking the dog.
One last follow-up. Can you talk about how your perspective on making this a transparent process or as transparent as possible?
Yeah, Pat touched on that, and you know, maybe both of you can add that. The transparency through the engagement piece is incredibly important. We want to work with you. We work for you and with you, so we will be as transparent as you desire or require. You know, I think when you get near the finalists, it's time to have that discussion. Do we have, and we like open meetings. We like having the finalists in. Sometimes it will scare away a finalist. So as we go through the process, we will have that conversation with you. But we much prefer having as open as possible. That being said, the applications that come in, those are private documents. Those are your documents. We ask you to sign a confidentiality agreement because those, you know, just the general applications, I think we need to respect that. And frankly, if those were, every application were open to the public, it would impact the applicant pool. Let me put it that way. Pat, do you want to add to the, Sarah?
I think that makes sense. Unless you need more info.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you. So now we got about maybe less than 5 minutes, if you have any questions for us.
I have
When
one.
can we start?
Yeah.
That's my first
a great
question and my last question.
You want to
Go ahead,
go
Sarah.
through a timeline on it?
We're eager to get started as soon as possible. I mean that in all sincerity. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, and it in some ways it does relate to that, the start time. And I've seen on your materials that you would like the person in place and working in February. And I just wanted to bring this topic to you, that there are some people who will be under contract, and both for contract purposes and their own ethical commitment to their current position, they may have a hard time leaving in the middle of that year. And so I wouldn't want you to be surprised by that you may in fact fall in love with someone who says, I just can't come until July 1. So you just probably need to think that through. On the other hand, you might find just the right person who says, I'm available and I'll be here February 1. But it's one of those possibilities. And if you do think this person is the right one and can't come until later, it may be worth your while to just wait, because sometimes that right match doesn't come along every day, and it is worth the wait.
Great, thank you for that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's fairly, we actually had a discussion about the timeline in our last discussion as well, and certainly are open to feedback on it based on your experience. I think the timeline that's written is not intended to mean that someone would show up in February, but not wanting to miss a great pool of people available in the Q1 timeframe.
Well, I think you're wise. I mean, just one quick change to say maybe announced by February.
Yeah.
You know, it sounds to me like you want this. You want to secure this person.
Right.
You want to know where we're headed, and that's very much in line for how this works. This is urgent work. We need to be out of the chute fast because the best candidates are going to be available now in the fall. The ones that are looking, you know, so we're up and running, and people are thinking about their next steps. So we have our work to do as well as yours. But the timeline, I think, can work for Sarah and I personally if it's more about announcing by maybe February, March.
Great. Okay, do you have any other questions? Otherwise, we're going to close out here.
Just curious, what kind of help do you think you need? Is there anything that we haven't been able to address that you feel would help you, that we could maybe think about or ponder a little bit?
I mean, I think that it's a challenge just across recruitment is ensuring that we are not following systems that historically we relied on. that eliminated people. And so I think we are really looking for innovation in really thinking outside the box of reaching out to candidates who we've historically missed. And so, particularly, candidates of color, women.
Find them.
And we want a diverse pool. And it's a challenge across the board. But, I think it's important, right, that we, really look at that process and
for all the
figure out.
right reasons.
Yeah.
Well, and I think too, if I may, I'm sure you all feel, because I feel your sense of passion and your commitment to your students, that I'm sure you feel that the changes in Madison in the last couple of years and the pressures that a lot of you are experiencing are unique to Madison, and I'm sure you feel and internalize that. And we would never minimize that, but you are very similar to most challenged urban communities across our whole country, and it isn't just schools. This is the nature of our country right now. So I think we have to be honest about the work that's ahead of us in us doing our search, in the work that you're doing in being community elected officials to carry on this, yeoman's task of making sure you have great schools. And not to use anything as an excuse, but you have a lot of variables here. I hear a lot about your ethnicity and diversity. It appears from your data that there are serious economic challenges too, which are certainly not excuses for student achievement and performance gaps, but they're variables. So the person that we bring to you has to have that understanding of how you mobilize a community, because we are sure your teachers are working hard, and we're sure you're working hard. And it takes more than that if we're going to move this needle. So I think your candidate has to work with your community health services, housing services, community services. This is a pretty integrated position. That's who I hope we can find for you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming here today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's fun.
Yeah, I really appreciate the depth of the questions.
Oh, yeah. It's exciting. I really get to
curious if there was, you know, another energy around that. So I would say one of my lenses going through the vendors were really like how our community would feel comfortable with this one or two individual or this team of folks in like sharing pretty vulnerable, you know, information with people that they have never met or people that look very different from them. And, you know, none of the firms have you know, are bringing a broad representation of our communities in a ways that I think that we would want to. So I'm curious if there is any energy.
I think we're out of scope for tonight's discussion.
So I think that is.
Well, if we don't talk about whether or not we're gonna have a potential community another firm to do the community engagement piece, I'm talking about
it's just what's noticed for tonight is only interviews. There's no board discussion notice for tonight, publicly noticed.
So we can't discuss it. But I like where you're going. I think that's a good point. And I think, you know, we'll bring it up on Monday and we can talk about it.
We'll talk about it
Okay.
without giving folks that.
Yeah, I know it's so hard, right? Because everything, it's so fresh in our mind and we just want to get into it.
We'll have to make a decision on Monday, and then if we don't have that information, so anyway, I totally understand.
Understood.
Oh, yes, your scoring, your final comments on the scoring sheet, just have those. Just work on those and then send them into Deidre.
And Barb, right?
And
So
Barb.
that cell, the first cell does not add up, and you know that, right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Yep. So, deadline on that, Barb?
It says 11 o'clock.
I'm asking the question, so.
Preferably, today's Thursday, tomorrow, by noon, if that works for people to get it in, that would be great. That would give us time to turn it around and do what we did similarly for you in just rolling up the full, so you would have your individual notes and you'd have the full board sort of scoring and ranking.
Great.
That's really helpful, thank you.
And when we were gonna get everything back, like the references, everybody's scores, what is the
so
time?
once all scores have been submitted to us, it is our intent to then send out the costing information so that you guys have that.
Could we have that before Monday?
On Friday or Saturday?
Yeah, as soon as the scoring information comes in, as to not to impact.
Right.
We want all scoring to come in first, and then we can send that information.
Thank you so much.
I think there's three things that the board will get, and the public, they'll be public as a part of the public notice for Monday. It's the scoring the scoring sheet that we've all done from the interviews, the references, and the cost. Is that right? And do you want to include also just some form of the original scoring of the RFP?
The roll-up?
Just
the roll-up of both, yeah.
Just so that that's kind of a part of the discussion.
Okay.
I don't know what you just said, but.
The first Excel we
The first Excel, that's gonna be given to the public.
So that it's all right there for us Monday.
All right, well, good. So we'll try to get the references to you on Saturday.
Yeah, we might be able to do it by the end of the day tomorrow.
That would be so good, thank you.
That would be wonderfully helpful.
Yep.
All right, all right.
So we understand.
Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay, second, okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? We are.
Thank you, Barb, for making all of this.